Well, according to TMZ, the family of Austin Metcalf was flooded with dozens of hateful messages after Tuesday's guilty verdict. You will not believe some of these. And it reports that someone told the family Austin's twin brother, Hunter, should have died, and that Austin effed around and found out. As a reminder, Austin held his brother's body after he was stabbed. And people are threatening to show up to the Metcalf family home. Now, this comes as supporters of Karmelo Anthony are now reportedly turning to violence following his conviction. Police in Jacksonville, Florida, are investigating a suspected bike attack that was posted to X after the verdict. Meanwhile, Anthony's parents had this to say about the ruling.
My son didn't intend to hurt anyone. My son was defending himself.
What stuck out to me, number one, was the all-white jury. But I was trying to be, like, all right, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, the truth is on our side.
What do you say to his grieving family?
It's unfortunate to where nobody wins. We've all been hurt by this.
The judge is defending the jury selection process and his decision not to allow cameras in court. Quote, they were picked based upon the law. They listened to the facts. It happened in this courtroom, and they got a verdict. I know I made people mad, but I'm not here to make them happy either. Donna, you have done a lot of defense work. What do you think about the integrity of the jury selection?
I think the integrity of the jury selection was very good here. I think the judge did a very good job of making sure that they asked the questions that they needed to ask. Remember, the judge's responsibility is to keep the courtroom orderly and is to make sure that it's fair. And what they had to do was find a jury that would be fair and impartial. There's no rule that says you have to have X amount of jurors that fall into certain categories. You just have to find jurors that are fair and impartial. And one of the big issues that we heard here is that there's a lot of complaints now that this was an all-white jury. This was not an all-white jury. This was a jury comprised of Hispanics, a jury comprised of Muslims, a jury comprised of Asians. So for Karmelo Anthony's father to make that statement, not only is it irresponsible, but it's reckless, because now that goes out into the community, and that's what the community believes, and then people become outraged when they don't know the facts. And so, number one, that was incorrect. The second thing here that people don't understand is, yes, there were 3 black female jurors stricken. And, that doesn't sound great when you hear about it. And the defense did raise a Batson challenge. And what a Batson challenge is saying you can't discriminate based on race. You can't push people off of a jury because of race or religion or ideology. But what the prosecution said was it has nothing to do with race. We want them gone because they're teachers. And we don't think teachers can be fair and impartial in cases involving 17-year-old kids. So is that a reasonable response? It is. Are we going to see that as part of this appeal? We are. And when the appeal happens, the appellate court's going to decide if that challenge was right and whether or not the judge should have allowed one or more of those black female jurors to sit on the jury. I don't believe, with all the trial experience I've had, and I've seen what happens in appeals like this, I don't think that's going to be successful. I think that was a reasonable reason. Also, remember, this jury made a decision in under 3 hours. So I don't think there was a lot of question about the strength of the evidence here, and I think the rest of this is a lot of noise, and unfortunately, what's going out into the community now is really problematic.
Yeah, and there are certain facts here, Arthel. For instance, Austin, his body was purple and blue as his brother cradled his body. It is a tragedy. He said, I don't want to fight here. There were several black witnesses who said, yes, Karmelo Anthony was engaging in aggression and this kind of behavior. And now there are no winners. I do agree with that. There are no winners here.
You're right. And so is Karmelo's dad, who also said there are no winners here. This is such a tragedy, and something that Donna just stated, which was the point that of what is out there in the community. A lot of this is racially charged. This is emotionally charged. Again, this is a tragedy, no matter how you slice it. But I wish that people would calm down. We don't need one more thing that would fan the flames of racism in our country. So we need to let the court, everything play out in the court as it should, and hopefully the right decisions are made by the law, that people cannot take the law into their hands. Again, this is just so sad, such a tragedy.
To the point of calming things down, Democratic Senator Tim Kaine was asked about this verdict, and I thought this was an admirable response and the exact right response. Listen to this.
I'm going to ask you about some Democrats who are saying the Karmelo Anthony ruling, the verdict was not fair. What do you think about that?
I have a hard time understanding why they would say that.
They're saying about racial
No,
bias.
I know what they're saying, but I have a hard time understanding what they're saying.
Guy.
Arthel is right that this has become very racially charged, and that was the case from the very beginning. But that was not organic. That was done on purpose. It was made racially charged by the family of the now convicted killer and their supporters rallying against white supremacy. That was one of their very initial talking points in all of this. And now you have, well, I think the dad is right saying there's no winners here, although there is a win in the sense of justice. A conviction is the just thing. So unto itself, that's a win. Obviously, the overall situation is utterly tragic from every angle. But for the father of the killer to go on television and lie about the composition of the jury, which he knows is a lie because he was in that room, that is another intentional step, I think, that the family and the supporters of this killer are putting out there in order to fan the flames deliberately, which I think is yet another grotesque element of this story. And the last thing I'll say is these threats against the family, the victim's family, is about as evil and demented as it gets. And I cannot fathom that sort of mentality, but it does exist.
And if I can say, Kaylee, I'm sorry, but I think, too, that there are threats across the board, and that's just horrible. You know, both sides are getting threats. It's just not right, guys. We can't behave like this.
I haven't heard of the Anthony family receiving any threats. In fact, they used hundreds of thousands of dollars that they raised to move into a gated community, claiming that they had security concerns, but weren't able to provide any evidence that they did.
Well, you know, again, Kaylee, everything will continue to be played out, and right now there is a lot of he said, she said, if you will, and I think that the evidence, let's hope the real evidence comes out, but those are some of the comments that I read as well. So look, to be very clear, again, I am very bothered by this case, and I'm not here to advocate for either side. I think what has happened is just an utter loss across the, you know, again, just no matter how you look at it.
Kaylee, I do want to end by talking about Austin Metcalf's family. I can't imagine losing my 17-year-old son who had his whole life ahead as his twin brother cradled his body. He had a gaping hole in his chest, and then this family is re-victimized. When they get threats like TMZ said, should have stabbed Hunter too. They are getting death threats to their family. They will quite literally never be the same again. They've lost a child, and now they're dealing with threats to their family.
Yeah, it's just so gross. And I think the Karmelo Anthony supporters, you see two things happening here. First, you have very prominent individuals among them, including people like Cardi B and Representative Jasmine Crockett, who are relying on a clear distortion of the facts of the case in order to push a narrative. They're just lying about what happened. They're saying that there were multiple boys who ganged up on Karmelo Anthony, again, disputed by the actual facts of the case. They're claiming that Austin was the aggressor in the situation and not Karmelo, who made a verbal threat before he actually acted on it. So that's wrong. But then you have other people who actually accept the facts as they are and continue to justify Karmelo Anthony's behavior regardless. There's a professor at Howard University who wrote an article on Substack this week titled, "Dear Jeff Metcalf, your son is dead because you failed to teach him that black boys have boundaries." She goes on to write, "We have to talk about Austin's decision to approach and confront." And she said that his decision to do that is part of a, quote, long cultural tradition of policing black bodies in space. This is insane. But I want to point this out because it shows that part of the defense here is rooted in an ideology, the same ideology that gave the left permission to violently riot in 2020, the same ideology that is being taught to children in our public schools across the country, and that is anti-racism. This idea that personal responsibility doesn't matter, this idea that certain minorities in this country don't have to conform to the same standards as everyone else because they've been historically disadvantaged. This is a rotten, evil ideology, and it still has consequences which are playing out in this case.
Yep, and that sounds a lot like victim blaming. For someone who can't speak for themselves, it's so shameful.
And that's all we've ever heard about for the last, since Me Too. You can't blame the victim, and yet here we are blaming the victim, and now all of a sudden it's okay to blame the victim. This, and the other problem here is that we have mom coming out on TV of Karmelo Anthony saying, my son didn't intend to kill him, he was defending himself. People don't understand the definition of self-defense. And when you're out out there believing that you have a right to plunge a knife into someone's chest without the reasonableness to do so, that's a problem.
And by the way, the take that you just described from that professor is one of the most racist things I've ever heard. Not an anti-white racism thing, an anti-black racism thing. If you're out there saying that black kids have boundaries and if you cross them, they're going to stab you to death, that is something that a skinhead white supremacist might say. It's racist and awful. No one should be making that argument, especially given the facts of this case.
Yeah, prayers for this family as they deal with these threats.
Be sure to like and subscribe for all the Fox News latest on YouTube and catch full shows streaming now on Fox One.